So maybe in the last couple minutes here, give us some final advice to budding entrepreneurs. And this is not age specific because I think, let's face it, we're in a really tough time. A lot of my friends who are in their, full stride of their careers, they are being furloughed, let go. These are tough times, and they're having to reboot, restart. And maybe people coming out of college or whatnot are not really optimistic about the future, but give them some advice about starting down this entrepreneur path with it. What should they be looking out for? What should they expect?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think one of the most important things to think about in the beginning of our careers, is that we're going to have this default desire to focus on whatever is in the headlines, whatever is cool, the coolest company that's on the cover of Fast Company or Wired magazine, the coolest technologies that everyone's talking about. We're going to want to build our network with the most important people that we think are being written about or that are, the most respected in our industry. And there's this but you're not, on your own doing that. Everyone is doing that. And I just, and then when it comes to choosing jobs or choosing choices or choosing the people to focus on building a relationship with, what I always like to remind myself that great opportunities never have great opportunity in the subject line. And so in some ways, we should see it as a negative signal if something is so clearly a great opportunity because everyone's talking about it. Yeah. If some company is so great because everyone wants to work there or the stock is trading at an all-time high. Instead, try to tune into your inner curiosities and the contrarian view on the things that you think are popular that no one's talking about. Ask questions to find the underlying plumbing that everyone's ignoring that matters more than anyone realizes, and then jump in there. And if people don't get it, that is a good sign. Gain confidence from doubt because it means that you're onto something. And to remember that nothing is ever achieved, nothing extraordinary at least, is never achieved through ordinary means.
I mean, we were just sitting back, chopping it up, reminiscing about the good old days and all that. Tracking my roots, where I came from and where I'm going. But like I say, man, always said it. It's not about the destination. It's all about the journey.
Hey everyone, Scott Belsky, founder of Behance, Chief Product Officer at Adobe, author of The Messy Middle, and you're watching Behind the Brand with Bryan Elliott.
Hey everyone, what's up? I am Bryan Elliott. Welcome to another edition of Behind the Brand. Scott, welcome to the show. And I usually ask my guests, how'd you get this job?
Well, the current role, running products for all of the creative part of Adobe, came out of being acquired originally by Adobe and my business Behance, which was a 5-year bootstrap, 2-year venture-backed journey to help organize the creative world at work and help creative professionals get attribution for their work. We became a part of Adobe. And then at that point, I had the opportunity to think, okay, my entrepreneur who just loves to go back and always create something new, or is my passion with the creative world and outfitting creatives to make ideas happen? And I definitely landed on the latter. And over the years, took on more responsibility to think about the future of creativity.
A lot of people watch this show. They're freelancers, entrepreneurs, small business owners. There's also a fair amount of people, I think, who are working and managing big brands. And creativity is a theme and a thread that runs through everything that we do. And I'm sure that the audience is thinking about too. Can we take it back in the chronology a little bit and talk about young Scott and what did you want to be when you grew up? Were you thinking about creativity? Were you, do you have pen and paper? Were you sketching? Like what were your aspirations back then?
Well, I found a picture at my parents' home of me at the age of, I believe, 8 or 9, with an area in our basement called Scott's Creativity Area. And I guess I put up signs and kind of claimed the boiler room as my own. And aside from the temperature, I think it was like a spot where I hung out all the time and came up with all kinds of cool things. And so I've always been a tinkerer. I've always been humbled by what the creative world is capable of that well surpasses my skills and capabilities. Over the years with Behance, just coming in the morning and going and seeing what the creatives I follow have done, overnight somewhere else in the world is just such an awe-inspiring thing for me. And so I was always kind of tinkering. I also was always interested in business and design. And so in some ways, this is and technology. So it's sort of the intersection of all of these interests, was in fact Behance and now Adobe.
And what did your parents think? And I asked this question with a little bit of a qualifier, in that, I think a lot of our younger audience, maybe the high schoolers, college students, whatnot, they're trying to figure out what they're great at, where their passion is. And some of them, I think, are struggling with, outside voices telling them, oh, you should go to law school, or you should be a doctor, or you should be an accountant or a plumber. And these are not necessarily their dreams, but maybe the dreams of their parents. So I'm just always curious, did your parents give you any pushback on that creative thing? Because, being a starving artist can be a problem. Did you get pushback, or were they pretty accepting?
Well, I'll tell you, my parents were definitely in different fields. So my mother was a Spanish teacher and when she was younger, and my father was a doctor. So my interests were uniquely my own. But they did try to always expose me to people that they knew in the community that they felt were more aligned with interests I had. I remember my father taking me on a fly fishing trip with him one year with another father and son. And this guy ran a sticker company. So literally my fantasy of a factory that made all kinds of stickers for kids and for industrial uses. And I remember after this fishing trip, he sent me a box of seconds, all those stickers that something was wrong with them. That feeling was just one of the greatest feelings of my life, just getting this endless package of creativity and tons of sticker material. It just absolutely blew my mind. So they were always supportive, in the ways that they knew how. And I think I'm grateful to them mostly for the, precious possibility of a precious opportunity of endless possibility. They always, whatever I was interested in doing, they were willing to support me. They, whether it was a program I wanted to sign up for, they would sign me up and pay for it type of thing when I was a kid. I think those things, matter a lot. And I don't think they, when I said I was an entrepreneur, I think that they were nervous. I think they were like, so you're creating a site for creators? What does that even mean?
Yeah.
But encouraging.
Give us some context on that timing, when you're starting to think about Behance. And if you don't know Behance, you're living in a cave probably somewhere, but give us some context on the year and when was that? Because when you mentioned stickers, flood of memories come back from me. I'm here in Southern California, the mecca for surf, skate, snow. I thought I wanted to go into action sports. And I remember, going into, like Wahoo's Fish Taco, which is like a rite of passage down here in SoCal. And they encourage you to bring your Vans or Billabong or Volcom stickers and put it in the restaurant somewhere. And especially like the first one down in Laguna, just covered with stickers. And that always got me sort of lit up. And I didn't even realize that kind of creativity really inspired me. But what year are we talking about here now with you starting to think about being an entrepreneur?
Well, I think it was around 2005, 2006. Okay. I was working in a job out of college in an investment bank, but doing non-finance things at that point around organizational design, like some stuff that was interesting to me and was important in my development as a leader, but was not correlated with building technology products and serving the creative industries. And I just started tinkering and late nights, every night, spending a lot of time alone, kind of dreaming up what this could be, writing a lot of prose documents, doing a lot of design of like concepts and things like that, wireframes. And
what was your college major?
What was that?
What was your college major?
So my college major was actually graduate general studies, because I took so many classes that they gave me like this general studies
Yeah.
Degree. But my classes were mostly in environmental economics or business, and design and environmental analysis. So I went to Cornell as an undergrad. They have this major called DEA, design environmental analysis, that I took a bunch of courses in. And then, when I was starting to tinker with Behance in 2005, 2006, I was connected with a freelance designer by the name of Matias Correa, who was just an incredible graphics designer and became a real partner for me, and eventually a co-founder. When Behance became a real company, I made it clear to him that his DNA was as much in this as mine.
Yeah.
And we worked together for many years.
Yeah, I'm sort of reading into this a little bit. Tell me how it was. I mean, him being such a creative force, a designer, you sounding a little bit more, at least on the surface right now, more technical, sort of a yin and yang kind of relationship. But I want to go back to 2005 and just sort of put down a marker, because that's the year a little website called YouTube came out. And really, that was a signal for me. I was working at a big company. I had a big job, a big salary, I had a team. I was working at the Hollywood studios. I was doing as at Universal Pictures. I had a $40 million P&L. I was on the brand marketing and strategy team. I went to school for business with an emphasis on marketing, but I ended up falling later into production. And 2005 was a real pivotal year, because it signaled to me, especially with YouTube, that the playing field was being leveled, especially for people who aspire to be creative like me.
Yeah.
And so I think that's in a really, really important timing. And I'm always curious about timing, like, how much luck plays into your moves. Of course, that old saying, luck is where, that hard work and preparation and timing all sort of meet at the same place. But yeah, those are good times. Those are just the beginning.
And it's interesting, as you're talking about YouTube, I'm thinking about a bunch of other products around that time as well, that the general theme was democratization of creativity, and the idea that you could be discovered and, get attribution, or at least get the spotlight for something without having to be represented by a mainstream kind of studio or whatever. I think it's a great point. There was a bit of like a Cambrian explosion at that moment. And the specific tension point or problem that I saw in the creative world, especially amongst my friends who are architects or illustrators or motion graphics artists or photographers, is these people were always represented by headhunters and agencies. They always had out-of-date personal websites, and it didn't matter because no one found them anyways, because you couldn't find them on a Google search. And their work, they never got attribution for their work. So they, everything, a great campaign would, the big agency would take credit for it, when in fact that agency hired another agency that hired a headhunter that hired a freelancer who really did all the work. And that like really frustrated me. And so the idea of Behance, and to your point, YouTube was around, there was embeddable video players at the time or soon after. It became pretty clear that you could have a multimedia expression and deconstruct the portfolio from someone's personal website to a platform of discovery like Behance.
Yeah, and let's remind people too. I mean, again, this timing, we're talking 2005, 2006, like Facebook is barely crawling out of the dorms. LinkedIn is not a thing. Even the internet is, we're barely into this thing, maybe 9 years-ish. I mean, people have websites, but it's not super sophisticated. Bandwidth is still pretty terrible. iPhone 1 comes out 2 years later and really sort of breaks open, the personal camera and video capabilities, but it's iPhone 1, not iPhone 12, right? And so you're a pioneer. I mean, this is like, visionary stuff where it seems like you really saw a need for stuff and you filled it.
I just kind of pursued the source of frustration. I mean, it's funny, we had a focus group in 2007 and it was our first and only focus group. We never did it again. we got a bunch of creatives we knew from New York, and Matthias and I hosted them for wine and cheese. And we shared with them, we asked them, do you need a social network or professional network to showcase your work and all the things we were talking about doing? And they universally said no. Like, the last thing we need. I mean, we've got MySpace, we have YouTube, we have LinkedIn, we have Facebook. Like, the last thing we need is another social network. And we left that, at least that conversation with some concern, but then followed up with these folks and asked them what their top 5 professional problems were in their career. And the problems were things like, well, I never get attribution. I have a hard time getting lead generation, or the only leads I get are from other friends who are in the same field.
Yeah.
My website's always out of date. The things that they said told us that they needed what they didn't know they needed.
Yeah.
And so I think it was, it's always back to customer empathy, right? And getting off your passion for the solution and focusing on really where the pain points are.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, I think that quote that gets attributed to Henry Ford, if I would have asked them what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, is probably worth underscoring a little bit here. And you guys having the foresight to sort of look beyond the surface criticisms or feedback to really get to the heart of the matter was super smart. That's a really great lesson. I appreciate that. And I also remember too, if we're talking about Adobe too, your future partner and now your, I guess partner is appropriate word, you're sort of leading the charge. These were times when it was, also just getting started, because I remember the Adobe suite wasn't what it is now. It wasn't like in the cloud, and it was kind of expensive, and it was super module, and you had to kind of cherry pick. Are you a Photoshop guy? Are you an Illustrator guy? Or, or if you had all 3, it was, and you're right. It was difficult, I think, for creatives to really get organized and have everything, at their fingertips like we do now. I think, again, if you're younger and you have less experience than us, maybe you're taking some of this stuff for granted. And that's why I mention it. But those are just the good old days, and they're just a few years behind us. It's not that long ago when things were just getting started. So I'm just reflecting and reminiscing a little bit how good we have it now.
Yeah, I remember using Photoshop when I was 13. I'm not sure how I paid for it, so may have gotten it somewhere. But and then fast forward to today. Photoshop is now a system. You can create cloud documents that you can work across mobile and desktop, and the integration of all these products is pretty phenomenal at this point. You have things like Creative Cloud libraries that allows you to, move assets between teams and between products. But, I came in late 2012 to Adobe. Adobe had just made the transition from software to services. They were suddenly more affordable for more people. And as a result, you had tons of new people in the top of the funnel that would land in a product like Photoshop, and they'd have no idea what to do next.
Yeah.
So the challenge that I've had, over the past 8 years, I guess, with a small hiatus in between, is to build a set of products, mobile products, services, first mile experiences, initiatives to simplify the UI, to build new learning platforms like Adobe Live and Behance, which is now like a 24/7 live streaming service of customers and our products. These are some of the fun things that we've tackled ever since that transition.
Well, it's been a game changer for me, and it's been, I think, a part we can credit Adobe, and probably now credit you a little bit with, helping them along. All of these sort of game-changing, pivotal, either technologies or advances, whether you're talking about the iPhone, which really opened the floodgates for people to get into what I do, which is filmmaking and telling stories with video. That opened the door for, DSLR cameras, and the barriers to entry to what I do used to be very, very high, which is why I waited so long working for someone else before I finally cut the cord, or had enough courage to cut the cord. Because up until about 2005, you had to be J.J. Abrams or like his brother to, get permission to make content. And then there was really no place to put it. And, if it weren't for people like Adobe and whatnot, Apple, let's give Apple some props too. Creative people like me wouldn't have the tools to make my art. So all of that is super necessary, and all of that was super pivotal to really bring all this to where we are right now, which is so many tools for so many people without barriers to entry. You're talking mobile, you're talking intelligent and logical UX, UI. I mean, I remember learning Illustrator, for example, when I first got started, because I was into, a lot of vector stuff, and it wasn't intuitive to me, at least. I'm not that smart. But now as I look at, I have the Adobe Cloud sitting right here on my computer, and I use it every single minute of every single day for everything I do in my business. I mean, it's so intuitive and it's so connected. And I feel like you guys are doing a good job with letting it talk to each other, right? Like whether it's After Effects working smoothly and seamlessly with Photoshop, and Photoshop with Illustrator, and InDesign and Lightroom, it just goes on and on and on. These are incredibly powerful tools, killer apps, if you want to say, an old term.
So, I mean, I would say, listen, first of all, thank you. And, I think a good product leader is never fully satisfied with his or her products. So for everything you mentioned, I'm like, oh, there's 5 things that we know are a problem and we're working on them.
Yeah.
So things are getting better. But I mean, I would also add to your point about the accessibility of these products, and how it's empowering, to you and your experience and many others. It's also that the distribution platforms are also now democratized. So you don't need to compete to get the 8 p.m. slot on ABC, to have your moment. You can, obviously everyone can publish and promote their product or their creations. The last thing I would just say though is that not only is, that's been the story of the last like 10, 15 years or so, or whatever, 20 years of technology and creativity. But I think one of the future stories is just how important creativity is to help humans stand out in what they do. That is uniquely human, because we're now being disintermediated by bots and algorithms and automation,
right?
And our artificial intelligence. And if you look at like what are humans going to do, what are safe jobs of the future? They are content creation. They are being in a workplace and having the tools to visually express your ideas and compel other people to change their minds, like showing data in creative and compelling ways. If you would argue that creative tools, the deployment of these types of tools is sort of like the, 20, 30 years ago, the deployment of productivity tools. Everyone stood out at their work because of how productive they were, right, until algorithms outpaced human productivity. And now it's like, you'll stand out based on how creative you are. Yeah. And so that's amazing. Like I think about the implications of that for the types of tools we need to create, what we have to do in education. Like creativity needs to get the heck out of the bounds of art class and permeate the rest of the curriculum. So, those are some other things that I'm pretty passionate about in this role.
Let's switch gears and talk about the messy middle for a minute. I want to know why you wrote the book and who you wrote it for.
Sure. Well, I'm always inspired by frustration. Behance was frustration with how disorganized the creative world is. My work at Adobe is frustration with how inaccessible a lot of these products are. With the messy middle, it was frustration with our obsession with the starts and finishes of every venture or bold project or turnaround.
Yeah.
It seems that as people, we love headlines, we love quick takeaways and sound bites, and we celebrate the starts and we celebrate the finishes, whether they're good or bad. We talk about them. And there's very little discussion about this in between volatility. And that in between volatility is what determines kind of the slope of your, is it a positive slope or a negative slope? Kind of tells you which way you're headed. And I think it's all down to 2 things. It's all about enduring those lows. We're not our best selves because we're making decisions out of fear, and we're churning, and we're not giving our team good direction. Teams are breaking apart. We're not being patient enough to let strategy play out. So how do you endure those lows? Yeah. And how do you optimize the heck out of everything that works? Whenever anything is high, when something is positive, how do you do more of that, both in your product or your experience or your content filmmaking or whatever it is, or how you work, how you manage others, how do you tune in there? And so this is a book about managing volatility and navigating the lows and highs. And I just went out and interviewed a lot of people, and assembled a set of insights that I felt were critical to that inner journey.
I think one question everyone has is, how long do you give this great idea with quotes until you cut bait? You might be right in the thick of it. I remember reading this book in high school. I think it's that Think and Grow Rich book or something. And there's this story about this gold miner in California who started on this mine. He was digging and digging and digging for years and finally just gave up, abandoned the mine. And then someone else came along and dug like 2 or 3 feet more and discovered like the richest gold mine in the history of the world. And it's that lesson, like, if he had only gone 3 more feet, he would have had it. So what are some of the signals? What advice can you give to the audience, my audience, about, how do you know when to give up or pivot or?
Yeah. Now as an advisor and an investor to many startups, I get this question quite often from entrepreneurs that I've worked with or that I'm working with. And my answer is always the same. When you set out on something that doesn't exist yet, you're doing so based on a sense of conviction that is somewhat naive. You have a belief in what the world should look like in your particular industry or space or whatever you're doing. And then you set out to make that so, to fix that problem, to change your world as you see it. In that process, you work with a lot of potential customers, you learn about competitors, you get MVPs out there, you start to see what people are doing or can't do, and then you get a ton more data. And as you continue in this journey, that data will either give you more or less conviction in that end state that you imagine, the way you think the world should be.
Yeah.
What I advise people is to tune into, forget whether there's product market fit or anything of that nature, whether it's really working in the market or whether you're generating revenue. Forget that for a moment and ask yourself a simple question. Based on all you know now, do you have more or less conviction in that end state? If you have less conviction, if you've learned all these truths that you didn't know when you were in that naive kind of ignorance is bliss moment at the start, then you should quit and try something else.
Yeah.
But if you have more conviction based on all this data you've accumulated, even if you're still, struggling and in that very messy middle and totally, struggling, it's par for the course. I mean, you're just in the messy middle. You've got to stick with it long enough to figure it out, which is, by the way, one of the competitive advantages, perhaps the greatest competitive advantage of the successful teams that I know, is that they just stuck together long enough to let strategy be nourished by patience.
Yeah. I mean, several icons come to mind, Bezos, all those years he was unprofitable and, all of them, look at Elon is doing his thing right now, right? Where everyone's questioning his judgment. Well, can he run 3 companies? Can he change the auto industry? There's a lot of examples of maybe even the jury's still out, but and I'm glad you mentioned MVP, minimum viable product. I think that's the acronym, right? And I think it's a really good, and it's worth underscoring and saying again, restating, which is when you know your MVP, or another way to say it is when you know really what you have to make in order to keep living, that makes the decision a lot easier. Because I think, this show's a great example. Like, if you look at all the other shows in my space that you could call my competitors, they were all basically started by people who were millionaires and then decided, you know what, I have something to say and I want to start a podcast or a series. And I either want to, do it to hear my own voice, or because I'm really knowledgeable and I want to share knowledge, or I want to promote my products and sell more stuff. I've always been independent, and I am not worried that we don't have gazillions and gazillions of people watching and listening. I just need the right amount of people, right? And so I know what that MVP mark is, that budget mark, what we need to make or spend or not spend. And that's my metric. And folded into that also is what you said, like conviction wise, I call it ROJ, or return on joy. it still lights me up to do this every single day, even though I've been doing it for a decade now. And that's how I know that I'm on the right course. So I appreciate you saying that. So I also wanted to know, because creativity is so important, and we're not just talking about people who are good at art or drawing or filmmaking. I mean, you can be the most amazing florist or CPA and be, artful and skillful. So, and I've asked a lot of people this, everyone from Sir Ken Robinson, who's, just passed, actually, we lost him this month. He had that incredible TED Talk about creativity. I've talked with Chase Jarvis, who's written a book on creativity. Give me your input on, so how do we know, how can we find our creativity, develop it more, and really use it to, improve our lives and the lives of the people around us? How do you find creativity when maybe you think I'm not that creative?
Well, I would answer it in two ways. There's one side of me that says that we've all got ideas. It's really about the other part of the equation, the organization around the ideas we've already got, that determines the impact we make with them. And so a lot of creative people I know actually have the opposite problem, which is they need to actually focus less energy on idea generation and creativity and more on just the systems or the people and the accountability mechanisms that keep their ideas developing.
Yeah.
In traction and setting milestones for them. And so it's that kind of equation of creativity times organization equals impact. It's like, if you have endless creativity and zero organization, you're going to make zero impact. And so it's just a mental model that people need to think about.
Yeah.
But as for where creativity comes from, I mean, listen, it's a mistake of the eye that you follow and run with. It's the flexibility of misunderstanding someone, but then kind of getting curious about why, and then following and pulling that thread further and coming up with a new idea. It is also like the traumas of our life. It's the stuff that is unresolved that is manifested in different ways that allow us to go against the grain of the status quo and kind of shun it just for the hell of it, and then come up with something that no one else ever came up with because everyone else is going with it.
Yeah.
So I think it's a combination of all of these things. And I believe everyone, the human brain by default is creative. And there's a ton of research suggesting from our, infancy that we are capable of problem solving and all the elements of creativity. And then of course it's the rest of our lives. What is it, the Picasso quote, like we're all born an artist, and then it's kind of downhill from there. And it's my interpretation of it. So how do we preserve that? What mechanisms do we use? What communities are we a part of that just keeps us curious?
Talk to me about where you think the white space is right now. If we put it through the lens of maybe what you're doing at Adobe, where's the white space? Where are the opportunities? What are we not focused on?
Yeah, I'll give you the medium-term answer and the long-term answer as I see it. On the medium-term side, content creativity has always been kind of app specific or content specific. You've started from content, or you've started with an app with a blank page and you've just started to make stuff. A new and important trend is collaboration first creativity, where before you even start with a piece of content, or before you even particularly start with an app, you actually start with who you're creating with. And then you share tools and you riff on each other and you share each other's assets. And it's this hyper collaborative approach is really interesting because the past generation of creatives largely shun it. The idea of someone else being in Premiere Pro with you or in Photoshop with you is just like a shocker. And some customers say they would never want that.
Yeah.
And then you have a whole other set of customers that expect it.
Yeah.
And so it's a really interesting, moment of clash, that I think is super exciting to explore as a product maker. And then the second answer I'd give you is really around the rise of the 3D and immersive medium. I firmly believe that screens are the new record players. No one will know what to do with their screens anymore. There will be no reason for them because we will have glasses projecting light into our eyes that synthesize any degree of size of screen with the highest fidelity you can imagine. And then just the idea of buying a clunky thing for your wall will be the silliest notion. And in that world, what will happen around every object around us? How many of them will be real? How many of them will be augmented? And the augmentation, will it be interactive and animated? Why should a sign just be stagnant? It should invite us. It should tease us and make jokes with us. And so there's this new explosion on the periphery. It isn't here yet, and I think still kind of a novelty for most, but it's I think it's the future, and I'm really excited to play a role in it.
That's cool stuff. I've been dreaming about, holograms and all of that since I saw Star Wars back in like 1977. And I've also been dreaming of the day where I could sort of like, Chromecast or Apple TV my content on any surface I wish at any time and any moment. And you're right. Like these clunky screens they're not mobile. They're a pain. They got to be plugged in. Wouldn't it be great to just have your content, let's say it's on a phone, and you can cast it up somewhere, either in 2D or 3D, and project, with the brilliance of a 5G, whatever. I love that. I'm looking forward to that day. That's going to be amazing.
Me too.
Yeah.
But we've got to outfit creatives to create for it. It's one thing to support it technologically, but actually I think the longer pull is to get creatives to adopt it. And so that's why it's hard work that we're doing.
So maybe in the last couple of minutes here, give us some final advice to budding entrepreneurs. And this is not age specific because I think, let's face it, we're in a really tough time. A lot of my friends who are in their, full stride of their careers, they are being furloughed, let go. These are tough times, and they're having to reboot, restart. And maybe people coming out of college or whatnot are not really optimistic about the future, but give them some advice about starting down this entrepreneur path with it. What should they be looking out for? What should they expect?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the most important things to think about in the beginning of our careers is that we're going to have this default desire to focus on whatever is in the headlines, whatever is cool, the coolest company that's on the cover of Fast Company or Wired magazine, the coolest technologies that everyone's talking about. We're going to want to build our network with the most important people that we think are being written about or that are, the most respected in our industry. And there's this but you're not, on your own doing that. Everyone is doing that. And I just, and then when it comes to choosing jobs or choosing choices or choosing the people to focus on building a relationship with, what I always like to remind myself that great opportunities never have great opportunity in the subject line. And so in some ways, we should see it as a negative signal if something is so clearly a great opportunity because everyone's talking about it.
Yeah.
If some company is so great because everyone wants to work there or the stock is trading at an all-time high. Instead, try to tune into your inner curiosities and the contrarian view on the things that you think are popular that no one's talking about. Ask questions to find the underlying plumbing that everyone's ignoring that matters more than anyone realizes, and then jump in there. And if people don't get it, that is a good sign. Gain confidence from doubt because it means that you're onto something. And to remember that nothing is ever achieved, nothing extraordinary at least, is never achieved through ordinary means.
We were just sitting back, chopping it up, reminiscing about the good old days and all that. Tracking my roots, where I came from and where I'm going. But like I say, man, always said it. It's not about the destination. It's all about the journey. Ain't nothing changed but the weather. The dangling carrot that hang from the rear view. Your dreams in the past ain't nowhere near you. Backseat drivers got nothing but 2 cents. Shotgun riders too biased, they all liars. I should get an A for effort, I'm too tired, but I'm never giving.